going to go ahead and get started this afternoon. We're now at Berkeley time, and I want to give our panelists ample opportunity to kind of present what their experiences have been. Welcome everybody to our teaching showcase for the fall, where we're going to be sharing faculty experiences with classroom response systems, or clickers. My name's John Hayes, and I'm an instructional designer in educational technology services. Today we have 4 panelists who have a diverse kind of experience with clickers, and we thought it would be really helpful to for them to share that experience with other faculty and give the opportunity for people who are interested to ask questions of them, get information from them about their experience. This isn't a technical demonstration, so just to kind of be clear, we really want to focus on these people's particular experiences, so we're going to focus less on the actual technology. That said, if you are interested in the technology or implementing the technology, let us know in the form of the sign-up sheet in the back, because we can get you in contact with people who can get you to a technical demonstration. We also have little pamphlets in the back that have information from the vendor who these 4 individuals use. It's called iClicker, for their classroom response system. So you can get information from there, and there's also some literature in that pamphlet that might be helpful to you. Our layout for today is really just giving you a quick introduction to the clickers and then getting to the panel and their experiences. Each panelist is going to share their experiences for a block of time, and we ask that you kind of hold your questions until we can then have a discussion and question section, so that each panelist has their kind of opportunity to get a fair say. So with that, I want to introduce our panelists from right to left. We have Daniela Kaufer in Integrative Biology. We have Lynn Huntsinger from Environmental Science, Policy, and Management, ESPM. I always refer to it.
Only 1 letter off from the sports channel.
That's right. That's what gets me. That's what gets me every time. And Ronald Lee from Demography Economics, and Michelle Dusky from Chemistry. So without further ado, I just want to get you, for those of you who really don't know what clickers are, in this case, clickers are simply this. This is what a clicker system represents. This is called the base station. So this would be what an instructor would bring with them typically to the class. And there's a port in the back that they plug this into their computer. They would then it is powered by the computer, and then it collects the votes for questions that are asked within a slideshow using these handheld devices. They have blue ones for teachers and the white ones for students. Students buy these at the bookstore. It's part of their charge, but it's a very simple, we're passing around so you can get kind of your hands on them, very simple multi-choice question response system. Like I said, there's lots of information about clickers. That's really not our focus today. Our focus really is on our faculty. So I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to Ron. He's going to be our first presenter, and he's going to talk about his experience.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay. So I teach a large undergraduate class of about 300 students in cross-listed in economics and demography. Incidentally, is there anyone else from social sciences here? Yeah, well, these don't seem to be used. I'm sorry that there's no one here, because I think they work great. So there's lots of other feedback in those classes. They have exams, they have problem sets, they have to write an empirical term paper. But I'm not finding this technology working too well. There we go. Okay, so I've been teaching that for quite a while, and I think I'm a pretty much straight up lecturer. And I look out there and the students look a little bit glazed and kind of passive, and they don't seem fully engaged. And I've always, tried to think of ways to make that better. Attendance, well, I post my PowerPoints in advance so the students can print them out and bring them to class and take notes, which is what they like to do. And there's also a note-taking service, so students can pay $50 and get, a pretty full, pretty much verbatim transcription of every lecture for the term through that. And
Do you vet that note? Do you vet those notes?
I have nothing to do with it except I permit them to do it.
So oftentimes they're erroneous.
They may be, yeah. Yeah. The quality varies. I haven't looked a lot, but I looked some. And so attendance, I'd say maybe like 60% or something like that would not be unusual. And I was a little concerned about that. And then I thought about doing webcasting, and I thought, God, if I'm having attendance issues now, what will it be like if they can just stay at home and watch it on the web? And all of these things led me to look into iClickers, but the main thing is that first one. That's the real pedagogical issue, it seemed to me. How I use the iClickers is maybe a half dozen times I ask a question, and it shows up on the PowerPoint slide. It's something I've worked at in advance. I don't try to wing it. And then I'll read the question out, and with the iClicker you've got 5, A, B, C, D, E responses. Yes, no, you pick one of those 5. I read the question out, and then I'll give them about 25 seconds to answer, and I can see as they're answering, it's received wirelessly, and a count of how many responded shows up on the screen, on my screen, and on the data screen, projected screen. And so about 20-25 seconds seems to be about right for almost everyone to respond, and maybe for some of those who are responding for a half dozen other students who didn't come to class, not to have time to do that. Because, as you see on the next thing, well, the kinds of questions. Okay, so these are multiple choice questions. There are 3 kinds of things I do. And one is substantive, either just about the material I covered in lecture, or else from readings or something like that. Then I do a survey for demographic information that then feeds into motivating what I'm talking about. And then I may ask questions about their attitudes or plans or beliefs or expectations. So now the first one I could grade on substance, and it's automatically recorded, what the answer is, and it's associated with the student's name and so on. But after some discussion with people like John, I decided not to grade on substance, but I do grade on participation. And it just counts for a little sliver of the total grade, and I let people have some, free passes and so on, but they get really involved. It's enough just to attach a little bit of the grade. Maybe it would be enough not to have it involved in the grade at all. I don't know, because I didn't try an experiment. But clearly, you don't have to do a lot to get them really on their mettle when it comes to answering questions. And then, since I'm asking things like the demographic background and their attitudes and so on, I always, for those kinds of questions, I always give an abstain option so that they can show they're there, they can participate and get their grade on participation, but they don't have to answer those questions if they don't want to. So, here's an example of a substantive question. Labor supply to the market of married women has increased greatly since the 1960s. And as a result, and then they have these various possibilities that are based on readings they've done, and which I've just discussed in lecture. And it's a little bit complicated, and you have to think through it. And this was early in the class. By the end of the class, I really became demonic on writing complicated multiple choice questions that you really had to think quite a bit about. So that's one kind of question. Then this would be a simple demographic background question. I ask at the beginning of the section we do on immigration. So if you're not born in the United States, you're an immigrant, where did you come from, and so on. We can compare that to national data and so on and so forth. And then here's an attitudinal or expectational question. What do you think about Social Security? Is it still going to be around? So on. That's something else we talk about. So those are examples of questions. And results. Well, I don't have any quantitative evidence on how students like it. It was really stupid. It would be such an easy thing to do with the clickers themselves to ask them to evaluate it. Anyway, so my experience of it was that they just looked much more engaged. I look out there and they're sort of on the edge of their seats much more, and clearly thinking, oh, I'm going to have to not only, I may be asked about how to apply this to some new situation and so on. Attendance was just dramatically better. I'd say attendance was about as high as you could expect given that people are sick and traveling and so on. Lots of students told me how much they enjoyed it, and including there's some graduate students in that class, and they were very enthusiastic about it also. And I enjoyed it too, and it broke up this sort of somewhat monotonous flow of the lecture and got them engaged. Score on my teacher evaluations went up, a few, about 0.3 or something like that, whatever that general question is. I was surprised I didn't find written comments on the use of iClickers in the written part of the evaluations. These are social science students, econ and so on. Most of them had never seen an iClicker before, so it was something new to them. So that surprised me a bit. And then I should say that despite the fact that I was writing these questions and had endless amounts of time to think about the answers, I got several of them wrong. And the first time I was really embarrassed and felt bad, and then afterwards I sort of got used to it, and I think it was very instructive for them as well as for me to discover that it wasn't all that easy. Okay, I think that's it for me. Thanks.
Thanks. And like I said, we'll hold questions until we can go to the panel discussion section, but we'll move on to Lynn.
Okay, and I just push this button.
Yeah, but if you're going to use the remote, you have to stand back behind the podium so that it can, otherwise you just have to hit the arrows.
Okay. Okay, I'm Lynn Huntsinger, first-time user. So I just started using the iClicker this fall with a class that I completely revamped. So I'm in the position of writing almost every lecture from scratch and then incorporating the iClicker into it. So it's been a lot of work, but I'll just tell you some of my experiences. First of all, why did I get interested in the iClicker? I'm not teaching a science-y course. I'm teaching an interdisciplinary letters and science discovery course. So there's students from all kinds of backgrounds. There's about 150 of them, sometimes 200 depending. And they're usually, a lot of them are freshmen. Although thanks to the iClicker, I can find out I'm a freshman anytime I want. So that's one nice thing about it. So I got interested, I put up here talking to students, but I've actually had one daughter or two daughters in Chem 1A where they've used the clicker, and they told me about these things, and I thought that was pretty interesting. And so then I talked to John in ETS, and I found out there was this program I could participate in. And talking to John actually saved me quite a bit of time, because we talked about what the purpose of my using the iClicker was, and I found that for my purposes, I really didn't need to take attendance, and I didn't need to give them quizzes using the iClicker. I was really echoing Ron, I'm not going to repeat all Ron's reasons, but I was really interested in engaging the students, especially in these large classes, giving shy ones a chance to participate. So that was why I did it. That saved me a lot of time, because I don't know how to take attendance using the iClicker or do quizzes or anything like that. I didn't go to the online training and how to do that stuff, and anything that saves me time is wonderful. So I highly recommend a consultation. Setup and use. I don't know how other people feel, but setting up equipment makes me nervous, especially early in the semester when I'm in a new classroom. And this adds one more layer. So that's something to be aware of. The iClicker is remarkably easy to use, almost too easy, because I expect it to be harder and then I get confused, but which is bad. And then I've experimented with types of questions. I am teaching a multidisciplinary, very broad general course. I'm not going to be asking for solutions to equations or what should be the output if I put ice cubes in hot water or whatever. I have to think about questions, and that's been really other kinds of questions, and that's been really hard for me because I don't do multiple choice. I never have given a multiple choice exam, and this is multiple choice. So what was I going to do? So I did find some things. One was that I particularly like that Ron didn't talk about is you can put a question out there and then say, talk to your neighbors about it, and then give me an answer. So one of the things I asked them that worked really well is I asked them, what are the indicators for a healthy forest? And then one person had to report from each of these little clusters that developed. We really enjoyed that. And then I was able to just, on the keyboard, type those into a multiple choice question and have the class vote on which of the indicators they thought were the most worthwhile. And then I followed that up by asking, why did you vote against A, B, C, D, or E? And they loved talking about why they did not pick one, much more than why they did. And that was one of the best discussions we had. And so that worked really well for me. And that's the question, why did you vote against this? And then I do ask personal questions every once in a while because they like that. We were talking about land use planning, and I said, well, where would you like to live? You know, on a little ranch out in the countryside or in an apartment downtown. Everybody enjoyed thinking about that and looking at where other people in their class wanted to live. Okay, so then I did do a survey. I used SurveyMonkey, though not the iClicker. And 74% of the class said the iClicker made lecture more interesting. It's hard to get, in my experience, that much consensus on anything in these large freshman classes. And about 19% of them said that they didn't like the iClicker. But then I think there's a little more insight in the next question that I asked is, one thing I was worried about is I don't like PowerPoint. And yet, to use the iClicker, you have to have something up there on the screen, you know. So I was really worried when I did the survey. I thought it was amazing that 97% of the class thought that I was using the right amount of PowerPoint, which is basically almost every day. I'm trying to follow all those ideas about not overwhelming and going slower. And the iClicker slows me down. I have to stop, you know, to ask a question and give them a chance to talk. I think that helps. And the iClicker, it's like 88% thought I was using it enough or not enough. That's a lot. And then just for comparisons, readings, I mean, that gives you an idea. That's more the typical result in my experience in terms of consensus about what you're doing in class. Okay. So the comments, the written comments, I did get a lot because I asked specifically for them. People said it was more interesting with the iClicker. It woke them up. Always nice. Say that. I was sleeping soundly and then I had to do this iClicker thing. I learn better. It makes the classroom more inviting, and then I like to see what others think, including one. Well, I don't think, but anyway, like to see what others think. So generally, they were pretty positive about it. And just so that I'm academically credible, I do have some criticisms. It takes too much time for a lecture, but I actually think the benefits of slowing down outweigh that for me. Somebody said, I don't like it for attendance. I never have used it for attendance. I still get emails from these freshmen saying, are you taking attendance? They're afraid I'm sneakily taking attendance. Really not. What's the point? I don't see what the point is if we're just using it for questions, which is sort of the opposite. If I don't get extra credit, like Ron, you were talking about your questions, you give them some credit.
Yeah.
That might be a solution for me, to have them get a little credit for participation via iClicker. I think then they would feel like this worked well. One of the written comments was quite long about how they paid $30, if they paid $30 for the iClicker and then only used it for this kind of stuff, and $30 for books, they were getting a better deal with the books for them. But that, again, that's a minority in the class. Too expensive, and I think that probably a lot of these students can use one iClicker for numerous classes, and they're taking chemistry when they're freshmen, or these other classes that use iClicker, so it's actually really not too expensive. And then the professor needs to learn. I need to set up quicker. Because when I first started this, I did this a few weeks ago. When I first started, I had some trouble with the, you know, manipulating all the things. I think I flatter myself that I've gotten better. Okay, so overall, my conclusion is, I mean, I'm going to keep using it. I think it's really valuable. The best thing it does for me is, you know, I'm a little slothful. And if I have to use iClicker, I have to think ahead, and I have to really plan how I'm going to interact with the students, and that's been probably the best thing.
Thanks.
Sure.
Daniela, you're up next.
Right. So I'll try not to repeat what you've heard so far. I taught with the iClickers the human physiology course. I'm from Integrative Biology. the human physiology is about 500 to 600 some students. We had 620 students last year. It was my second time teaching it. First time teaching it, I found it really completely different than what I imagined my interaction. So that was my first time my first year on campus, my first time teaching. I taught the course totally different than what I imagined I wanted to teach. Like, it wasn't interactive at all. There was this bulk of 600 students, 8 a.m. in the morning. They're all pre-med. And I would try to be really interactive and talk to them and ask questions, and there's dense silence, nobody. And then I started thinking it couldn't be my lovely personality, it has to be something about the class itself. And if I was a student there, I would not ever participate, because it's really, I think it's scary. It's scary to sit in such a big auditorium and do anything that's participatory. So at the same time, I came across, probably through CNN, during this, this experiment, I thought I'll try the iClickers. And the bottom line is it worked. It worked just as I wanted. So what my aims for incorporating it were to increase the student engagement level and to increase their participation in the course itself, and then achieve sort of an active learning. So again, I didn't like this passive, I'm dumping things on them, they don't participate at all, and increase the opportunities for problem-solving skills. So I thought really there are not a lot of problem-solving in this course. The other problem that we have with this course is that there's no study sections and there's no GSI assigned to the course. And that we'll come back to at the end when I talk about what didn't work with the iClickers. So, so this would sort of give me, I thought, a way to have problem solving in class where we work on problems with them. They get to see it. So those are the type of questions that I did. I tried to start with an iClicker question. So we'd start with 3 or 4 iClicker questions at the beginning of the course, and then every 15 minutes or so I would stop and have a question in there. The beginning questions were always like a reading material quiz, though it wasn't a quiz, they were not graded for it. But it was a really good way for me to know have they read or not, and I think it became an incentive to actually read. Because you, right at the very beginning, you'll know what you're not knowing, what you don't know, and it'll be sort of data-like questions, right? What type of memory do you engage right now to answer this question? They had to read about the different kinds of memory to know what kind of memory it is. And then they'll get the answer for that. So if they didn't read, at least they get now a clue of what they were supposed to know. So assuming you just learned it, this is the memory that you're using. Right? The second thing that I got during the semester, which I didn't anticipate beforehand, was that a really good reality check for me of what they know and what they don't know. So when I went through something that was a little more complicated, a point that was a little more complicated, this is such a great way of online knowing if they understood or they didn't understand. And especially sitting, you know, if I were to ask them, probably nobody would even raise their hand, and if they did, I'll know if that one person understood. Now, online, in class, I know about the 500 people sitting there, do they understand what I said, or should I go back and say it? And so many times they did not understand. I really didn't anticipate that. I really didn't know how much of the time they have no clue what I'm talking about. I made a horrible, I just did not get my, and then thinking about it in retrospect, that would mean that the rest of the class then be lost, because they had no idea what I said that time. So that was really helpful. Yeah. I'll try to make it a little for them as well. I think it was a very effective self-evaluation for the students themselves. So at a point in time, they would know how they're doing in respect to others in the class, and that gives also opportunities for peer teaching. So I would do something like ask this, and then the graph pops up. You can show the graph of the results as they're voting or at the end. Quickly I learned that as they're voting is not a good thing, because they would just wait to see what's the popular vote and everybody would go with that. So I would hide it as they're voting and then close the voting and show it up, and you see what people have. So, and now we go over what's wrong and what's not wrong, and usually I try to get people to say, why do you think A, somebody chose A, why do you think that's right, somebody chose B. And so they explain to one another, which I think works really well. It gave me this opportunity that I was looking for in-class problem solving. So as we went with the semester, I could go in more into showing them the problems, having them actually solve it in class, come back and report what they did, and then we'd go over the details. Now, obviously you can do it without, but I think they're really much more engaged and into doing it, and I know that they have, each and every one of them are going to report to you what they found. And then used it, again, as Lynn said, as a sort of a lead to class activity. So I would come up with scenarios like, you remember pre-meds, you're a pediatrician, you're in your Oakland clinic, you see a lot of patients with sickle cell anemia. What do you think would explain that? And so they would tell me what they think. And then the next step would be something like, okay, well, now we found out, we know what protects the newborns, let's design a potential therapy. Go into groups, talk about, come back and tell me what's your idea? How are you going to test this? What step are you going to do to start a company that sells this drug, and so on. So just leading them into it, they were just more engaged. You obviously can do that without the iClickers, but they were really so much more activated. And I tried it the year before without the iClickers, and the response were day and night.
You have your 600 students break into groups right in the classroom right then?
Yeah, so talk to 3 people around you, and then report back. So at the end, I don't talk to 600 people. There'll be 3, 4, 5 people that raise their hands and give an answer, but they didn't the year before when I tried.
Yeah.
There was one person who kept on answering, and he was in my lab. And the year after, and it was different people. So somehow it made the classroom more conducive to do that, or they felt more comfortable. So what worked, what didn't work? Student engagement level definitely went up. I totally achieved that, that goal that I had. The overall activation, participation, as I said, even in just now asking different kinds of questions, that worked really well. I had a really accurate grasp of their understanding, which I thought was good. What I did at the end is 10% of the exam was drawn from the iClicker question pool, which was also good because those were questions that we went through, they knew, and it gives some kind of a perk, a bonus for the people who used it. And I think having John's help with it was critical. Otherwise, I would have very different experiences at the end of the semester. What didn't work? So we got the same, thinking about it, we got to exactly the same point. Is they're paying $30, they need to have something back from it. Let's give something. They got iClicker bonus points. With us, it was 5 points, so 5% of the grade. You had to participate in 75% of the clicker sessions. I thought that was very lenient, and it wasn't about right or wrong, it was just about the participation. This caused so much trouble during the semester, completely unworth it, completely not worth it for me. So we do not have GSIs. I had to do all of that myself. The technical problems, and it is a big class. I mean, dealing with 600 students, just the volume of their emails telling me that the batteries don't work and the clickers didn't click this time and they forgot it this morning and it was lost in BART and then and I started very generously answering all of those and then saying, well, if you forgot it, you could come and I'll write your name and student number and I'll put it into hours of dealing with it. And then somehow, I guess, just being they were very, very, very attached to those 5 points and they harassed me to death over it. That we will not do that again. That by itself created something else that we didn't anticipate, is that we started getting anonymous mails saying you should look at people having multiple iClickers. And so at some point, I taught this with George Brooks. Professor Brooks had his people from his lab come in with videotapes and videotaping the people. There were people sitting there with 10 and 15 iClickers clicking for their friends. And then we were very upset with that. We accused the class with that. They hated us. Our teaching evaluations were the lowest that semester. I did get really good responses about the iClickers, and students really loved it, but we went into a battle with them over that that really was just not worth it. So, and I don't know how, and some students came in and told me it's just too easy. It's not like cheating. If I can't make it this day, or if I know I'm going to be late and maybe you'll have questions in the beginning, it's easier to give it to a friend of mine and I forgot to take it back. And so that part I don't want to deal with again. So the time commitment, the cheating, and the technical problems that was around it made me think that I'm definitely going to use it again, but not with the points. That part out. That's it.
Thank you so much. Michelle, will be our last speaker, and then we'll have some discussion.
So I'm Michelle Dusky, and I supervise the Chem 1A program. Sometimes I teach it, but a lot of times I'm the middle management because we have 1,300 students. There's 42 GSIs that I directly train and supervise, and we offer 3 lecture sections. They have a common syllabus, common exams. They're allegedly identical, you know, within personality traits and stuff. And the pace of the class is very fast. They go from this class right to organic chem. Many other universities have 2 full semesters of general chemistry. And because of some pleas from the bio department that the pre-meds were spending 2 years in our department, we'd made some changes a while back. But we do grade the iClickers for many of the reasons that some of the faculty have already mentioned. And some of it does have to do with, we want that participation, we want that feedback, and we want it to be worth their time and money to purchase this other device. The list of materials that they need for this class is actually quite extensive, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're spending close to $300 or $400 for our class alone. So we do want them to feel like there's a benefit to that. We have tried a system like Daniela, is it Daniela or Daniel? Mentioned, where last year it was if you get X percent, 75% of all the iClicker questions, I think we said correct at that point, you know, you'll get your X number of points, and that was kind of a mess. Same problems, but times 2. And so we went to this new system where it's just 2 points per lecture. And one of the points we're calling a quiz, and one we're calling a participation point, where they're participating on all the questions. So if they're confused and they get the quiz wrong, at least they're getting a point per day for being there and trying. And the quiz questions are based on what we're calling a pre-class assignment. So we're using kind of the just-in-time teaching model, where prior to the lecture there's a pre-class assignment posted on BSpace that the students are supposed to print out, work through in groups, whatever it takes, figure it out, and then that quiz question is based on that. And it's a springboard of mentally preparing them for lecture. A lot of times it's structured to be around presenting them some data that they're supposed to make some observations. Oh, as this number goes up, what happens to this number? What happens to this value? So just to kind of prime the pump a little bit. And really, if they do their assignment, and especially if they get help if they're confused, then they just get these points. It's, you know, it's pretty straightforward. And we have mixed results. You know, there's days definitely between tests where it's like the votes are just like a wash. You just, you know, on the quizzes where you're like, wow, no one did that assignment. Great. Here's an example of one of our chem quizzes. The pre-class assignment on this day was a card sort. So I work with Professor Angelica Stacy. Many of you may have heard of her. She's a vice provost and stuff, but she's really steeped in education, chemical education, done a lot of thinking through some of this stuff. So the assignment that preceded this, the pre-class assignment, was a bunch of pictures of all these different solutions, different materials, different concentrations, and they were just supposed to sort them, and then sort them in a different way, and then sort them in a different way. So they're seeing patterns in the solutions, and then we're getting at the molecular picture, even though we just have little dots and squares to represent molecules. But so here's a chem quiz that's based on that. You know, which of these things is not like the other. The students vote. If the votes are very split, we might have them discuss and re-vote. And depending on how generous we're feeling, we'll count the second one. But and then the participation questions are just scattered throughout the lecture as needed. Usually these are related to, did they just understand what we just covered? Can they extend it? So the chem quiz was, what are the patterns? What are the trends? What do you notice? Then we started refining the understanding of solutions. Then the participation was based on that refinement of the model or the idea. So this is a typical question. Whoops, I think I'm going the wrong way. Sorry about that. So logistically, because we are doing the grading, there are some considerations with this. Everything hinges on their ability to register their device to their student ID and type in the device number on the back of the iClicker and their student ID correctly. And sadly, some of our students do have difficulties with this. So they're supposed to register their device. They vote in class, we collect the responses, and then the transmitter numbers and the responses are tied together. We then run the iGrader software and we grade the responses, and that's where it ties their web registration to their transmitter. So then we get SID and their scores, and then I upload that score into BSpace. So that last bit is tricky because if they have mistyped their student ID, it won't upload anything for BSpace, and then that's when we hear back from them. So the downsides to this, as you might imagine, is just keeping track of all this data. We run these 3 lecture sections. They actually run them as separate iClicker sessions. So every day we have a spreadsheet or data that's generated for the 9, the 11, and the 1 p.m. lecture, and then times 43 lectures. It's just a lot of data to keep track of. And the students have all kinds of concerns, and I do think that if we're going to require them to use these in class, meaning that it's worth points, that I feel really strongly that we need to have some customer service on this. It doesn't mean I like it. I actually hate it quite a bit. I get, a lot of the inquiries. I would love to talk about chemistry. Heaven forbid I would get to have some chemistry questions, brought to my door, but instead it's like, my device was left on bar, just like you were saying. And cheating is a problem. We've confiscated iClickers before. We say that in our course policy, that you're not allowed to be bringing iClickers from your friends, and we've had to crack down on that sometimes. So our GSIs are instructed to confiscate devices and write those numbers down, and they'd lose their iClicker points for the semester. And that's this semester, that's like 7% of their course grade. So there's a big penalty if they get caught. I would recommend that if you are going to have these things used for grades, it's pretty easy to set up the device and just collect votes in class. But if you are going to do anything with those votes, it'd be nice if you had a staff person or a dedicated GSI or something that does iClicker for you, because just tracking down an inquiry, like if a student misregistered their device, I still have that they voted. I have their transmitter number and all the times they voted. I just got to link that up, but that means I got to look in those billion spreadsheets. So it's my advice, actually, if anyone wants to do grades, I can show you how to do this. I actually created an Excel document where I merged all these other documents, because the spreadsheets that are generated are like transmitters and their responses, ABC, on the different quizzes. Then you've got the scores, which are the student IDs and their scores. But I merged it all together with some fancy Excel VLOOKUP functions and things, so that in one spot, for the semester up to this point, there's a big spreadsheet that has everything. Otherwise, I would literally be going and opening multiple files to deal with that student that misregistered their device. And I also highly recommend having a grace period at the beginning of the semester while they're buying materials and getting registered, and maybe a few freebies, so that if you're sick a couple days, I don't care. I don't want to hear about it. I'm giving you 8 free iClicker points. I'm giving you 4 free days for if you want to duck out of town early, you forgot your device, whatever. I don't care. But those are your 4 free days. And then we hold them to that. When we do get inquiries, we're like, well, I guess that was one of your 4 free days. That's our stance on that. We chase down the inquiries if there's an error or a device malfunction, but if they just miss class, we just don't entertain that. And that is it.
Oh, great. All right, well, I'd like our panelists to come up and have a seat at the table, and we'll allow an opportunity now for our audience to present questions to our panelists. There's a mic here. It is on. So feel free to ask questions.
Or do we have to give you an iClicker?
I'd like to ask Michelle, do you have any feeling about whether they keep the clickers after you do Chem 1A for, Bio 1A, they have to have had Chem 1A. So may I assume then that every student coming into Bio 1A has a clicker? Or is there a secondary market in these things?
We use them around the clock typically, so spring semester Chem 1A students will use them. Some students will sell them to each other. So unless they've sold it back to another student, the bookstore doesn't take used iClickers back. So there is a market for selling to each other for other courses. But if there's word of mouth, and there always is, right, with our big classes, that they're going to need it in Bio 1A, and we can help you manage that. If you want me to post an announcement and say you're going to use your iClickers in Bio 1A, so keep them, I'd be happy to close that loop. So yeah, I would say they would tend to keep them.
Do you know how many classes on campus use it?
Currently, I think in the fall 2008, I believe there were 7 classes that were using the iClicker, but there are several others in the spring. For example, Ron's class was in the spring, and Hill's class was in the spring. So we don't have a full number of all the different classes.
Yeah, because I was wondering, if each student, if theoretically a student bought one, that they would keep it through their whole college career, but if it's only, how random is it that one person's going to take all those 7 if it's only 7 classes? You know what I mean?
Right.
And they can't sell it back at the bookstore? They don't do use?
I don't think they do use.
Well,
They're going
Did
to.
Yeah. Oh, great.
They can sell them to other students too. So a lot of them buy their iClickers from other students.
Online, there's a market.
Is there?
Market. You get about half. I think you get about half the price you paid, and if you buy a used one, it's only a slight reduction in price. Is what I recall.
Oh.
Last spring, the bookstore sold them at 25 and bought them back at 15. So it's not too bad. But actually, if we kind of create a string between Chem 1A and Bio 1A and maybe Bio 1B and physiology, that's enough for it to be really worth it. But I think they need to know that. So there has to be a way. We were thinking of maybe putting even in the catalog, putting a sign, an I sign, or something that says that this course will be using them. It's a good idea to keep them.
I'm astonished. There are only 7 classes using this.
This term.
In the whole university.
According to.
What about the PRS system, the other system?
And that brings up a good point. We didn't. iClicker is just one of the vendors that sell classroom response systems. It's a vendor that all of you have used, and it's a vendor that we've last spring had a pilot program to support faculty adopting. But we're not tied to iClicker, and we don't have any official relationship with iClicker, and there's other PRS systems used on campus in different classrooms and by different departments. We just don't have any information about them. So.
And I just kind of found out about it by chance, and then looked into it and found there was this program I could participate in. And if I hadn't had kids who were taking chemistry, I don't know that I would still know about it, because it's been pretty much confined to buildings that had it built in originally, right? Or something like that. That's where it sort of started. I don't know how old this pilot program is. Is it just?
We just started in the spring. And so, one of our interests in having this session today was to increase awareness and get a conversation started amongst faculty about whether these things are something they want, and if so, how do they want them? And so, I think it's a great point of thinking about coordinating, especially within programs who have sequences of courses that are likely to use the clickers, so that students know what the what their options are and the strategies that they might, as far as acquiring them and keeping them.
So first of all, thank you all. It was fascinating to listen to you. I thought I knew a lot of stuff that I clearly know nothing about. I'm interested in the kinds of questions because some of the questions were much more varied and interesting, and I love, Lynn, yours where you actually create the question in front of them, which I've never thought of. But so what questions are bad? There've got to be, I've seen some things that looked like they weren't good that because the students there's really nothing for them to do or think. Have you all had experience with questions that you trashed because they just weren't working with iClicker or not?
Sometimes we just have typos or things that are poorly worded, and then the votes are split, and then the whole class will go like, wait, and then we're like, oh, okay, oh shucks, you know. And so it's more of a thing about refining, but just like you can, there's a time and a place to ask a broad question, there's a time and a place to ask a narrow question. I think, you know, the system allows you the flexibility to do what you need to do in the classroom as needed. So I guess like with the students, there aren't bad questions.
Yeah, I thought, now that you say that, I think, yeah, often these things, they turn out to be a bit ambiguous, that you see, and I think that it promotes this discussion, and students, you know, get indignant and argue, and it's good. And you say, well, if this were an exam, these questions would have been much more carefully phrased and so on. But yeah, I think so. I have the same experience. I think these slightly sloppy questions often end up being great.
Can I addend my statement, please? I would say that there are some faculty in our department that write some really tricky questions. They're good in the sense that they get the discussion going, but I think sometimes they're so tricky that the students are just struggling to figure out what is being asked here and how do I do it. And it does prompt them later to go figure that out, but I would say sometimes when I'm in the classroom and observing, I'm like, you know, you're wasting a lot of time on this just because you wanted to give them a tricky question. So you got to decide if that's a tricky question is a good use of lecture time.
Since I'm trying, first of all, I'm not using them for quizzes, it takes a lot of the pressure off. You know, the kids aren't so, or the students aren't so tense about the questions. But the other thing is, I tend to ask questions. Sometimes I want to do more of the follow-up questions like you were talking about to see if they understood what I said. I haven't done that enough. But generally, since I haven't done that, I'm disappointed if everybody knows the answer or if everybody says the same thing. I'm looking for kind of a spread that we can discuss. So I'd say I was a little disappointed. They obviously read ahead yesterday. On the one hand, that's good. They're actually doing the reading. On the other hand, there's not much to discuss. You know? Okay, you know.
I don't know if Michelle's is the only course that has GSIs, but do the GSIs lead separate discussion sections differently? And do they have quizzes there or anything that quantitates the students, makes an assessment of the students' comprehension of the material?
We do have weekly quizzes in the discussion section. And actually, some of the GSIs are so excited about iClicker, we always have an exam review session where willing GSIs will lead a big review session, and it could be like in one of these bigger classrooms, like Pin Intelligence for the whole class to attend. And
prior to
you know,
midterm.
Prior to midterm, yeah. And the GSIs are like, can we use iClicker? And I happen to have my own kit, and I was like, yeah. So I got that hooked up real easy. And those GSIs recommended it to other GSIs, and people are like, well, can I borrow that for my this session or that session? They really like it.
In the separate sections, they ever use the iClickers with those quizzes for the outcome?
No, they're all paper quizzes. We run 6 labs at once, so it'd be 6 setups, 6 laptops. So
I really think it's for a big class too. You know, little class, it's your opportunity to make them actually take the risk.
I have 450 in my biochemistry class, so they're big.
But I was thinking of discussion sections. Weren't you talking about discussion?
Yeah, they have 30 something.
I think it could be useful in the discussion section, but not to the point that I've been willing to figure out the logistics, I guess.
But how do you coordinate those quizzes? Because they're basically like numerical values that could be added to the clicker scores for in-class performance. And somehow this all gets rolled into one ball of wax. Is that part of the spreadsheet too?
They're discussions in lab, or they're quizzes that are conducted during discussion sections, a separate part of it, right?
I mean, I really like the idea of using these in class because with the normal Socratic method, as you've all been saying, either nobody raises their hand or a few eager beavers raise their hand, and you really don't get a sense of whether they're comprehending what you said that lecture or what they read in the textbook that led up to that point. And so doing this and seeing the histogram really does give you some instant feedback. It's a really great idea.
So it was also very interesting that there was this diversity of approaches to grading or not grading and how that was done. So as I said, I graded on participation. It certainly took a few weeks before this got up and going and so on. I had some of these problems that people describe as, yeah, that's hard, entered it wrong, and so on and so forth. And then there's the problem that they leave them in class and you have to manage some sort of system for lost and found for iClickers and all of that. But it didn't get out of hand. I think I handled all that myself. And as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, particularly as you were talking about, trying to grade all these quizzes, and that the kind of system where you just grade on participation may be efficient. I think the students, they don't like to get the answer wrong, whether it's graded or not. It just doesn't feel good. They feel good, they click, they got it right. It's universe is giving them positive feedback. And maybe, you could use all the, have the quizzes and everything else and still just grade on participation, and you might save a great deal of hassle. And
there are other semesters. Professor Stacy's been the only one, so last fall and this fall, that have graded based on the correctness of response. But every other faculty that uses iClicker in chemistry only grade on participation. And we still have, I would say, the same complaints. Because they're still after every single one of those points, and they feel entitled to it. Even if they didn't bring their device that day, they still feel entitled.
But if you give, like you give 25% of the classes away free or something like that.
Yes, they feel entitled to full credit, regardless of where you set it. It's serious. It's
in the end, almost everybody got full credit for this anyway.
Right.
That doesn't fit on.
But they won't come here. On that one point.
But I'm wondering if what you said 10% of the questions are on the final are going to be taken from the iClicker pool. I wonder if that's enough. Then they'll want to come and participate with the iClicker because those are going to be ones that are going to be on that test.
Yeah, so that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, I wonder how strong a motivator that is.
And it was a good way to select the questions, because some questions I did not think were tricky at all. But then when presented in class, were very tricky, and we would get stuck on a detail that I didn't anticipate. So it was a really good way for me to select good questions where you have a spread, you could see, and then maybe working through it, more people understood it. And so I used those questions at the end. The thing is, I post them as well. So they've asked that all the iClicker questions would be posted after the lecture. So before the lecture, I put the PowerPoint, and after the lecture, I would add all of the iClicker questions and their answers. So I think if that part was not, if I would not post the iClicker questions, then that would be the incentive. You don't have to participate. You'd have to just be in class and see them, right? But yeah.
Do you have the iClicker questions in the PowerPoint that is posted on the web beforehand?
So beforehand, I would have just the presentation.
Yeah, see, I started out doing it that way, and then it just got too much of a hassle, and I went just putting them all in there anyway, since I wasn't grading on correctness.
But a lot of them, they had multiple steps. So they would answer, and then we talk about something, and then the next part would come up. Yeah. You couldn't do that if they saw it.
Yeah,
even if they didn't look at it beforehand, and they just had they could flip through and come to the next second part, then it's, yeah. So I always posted them afterwards. Yeah. And yeah, that was another hassle.
Do we have maybe one last question? Yeah, go ahead. And
well, it seems,
and then we'll wrap up.
I think it's great that the involvement of the extra work that you guys are doing for this iClicker thing. It seems like you guys are more involved. Do you think that average, or I don't know how to word this politically correct, do you think most instructors would be willing to put this extra effort into it?
Well, for me, like I said, I haven't done the tracking. I told them the iClicker was required and that I would see if they registered their thing or not, but I'm not even going to do that. You know, so that's all I've had to do is think ahead about how to interact better with the class. And
which seems like hours, you know, potentially.
Well,
how many more hours did you
but
add onto your workload?
I thought a half hour for every hour and a half class I taught that added on, something like that.
it's much more satisfying though and fun.
Yeah,
They're engaged, so.
Yeah.
I think it's time well spent. Like if you have a class that's a dud and you have to work harder to make it like, more interesting, and it gets you to think about, you know, and it gives the students, you're writing all those questions. All that is clues about what do I value in the course? What are my learning goals for you guys? What's the emphasis? Because that's the thing is like we have, you know, a billion textbooks of Gen Chem that are available. We pick one, whatever. But that's their clue, and they need it, especially for our freshman level classes, to figure out what we value, and it's a good review tool for them for tests and stuff. So it's time well spent. I think overall it's a warm fuzzy for everybody.
It does seem like you guys care a lot about the students, and
I also expect that I'll be able to use some of the questions over again next
Oh yeah,
week.
you totally
That's
can.
my plan. Here next time.
Wow, well, this has been great. I'm really glad we had a good attendance to this. So hopefully everybody got something out of it. I want to especially thank our panelists for taking the time above and beyond all their planning and effort that goes around developing clickers. And of course, I'd like to thank the rest of the training and support staff for ETS that helped put this event together. But thank you all for coming.